I'm so pleased to get started. I'm so excited to present our guest for tonight, Brett Axel, speaking about Not Okay, his novel, and also introducing us to Vinyl Publishing. So I'm really excited to talk to this guest tonight. Oh, I went a little bit backwards. Let's go back. Firstly, for those of you who are brand new and haven't been here before, we are Lost City Books. Uh, excuse me. We are Lost City Books, owned by Adam and located in Adams, Morgan, no relation. We are a used, new, and rare bookstore located in Adams, Morgan, DC, and operated by what I like to think of as some of DC's coolest kids, artists, educators, musicians, writers, and of course, avid readers, all coming together and creating a unique environment where we curate an eclectic selection of books just for you. Uh, and Not Okay is one of those books. I'm your host for tonight. My name is Shady Rose. I'm very pleased to be here. A little bit about our author for the evening. Brett Axel is the author of 6 books. His work has appeared in over 100 magazines and anthologies. As well as an author, he has edited 3 books for Vinal Publishing Incorporated in Buffalo, New York, a publishing company started in August 1st, 2019. Is that correct? August 1st, 2019. He has 3 collections of poetry in print, edited the poetry anthology Will Work for Peace, wrote the critically acclaimed children's books Goblin Heart, a fairy tale. Amazing. I love Goblin Heart. About Vinyl Publishing. Vinyl Publishing pledges to make it their mission that artists and authors get paid for the work that they do. Snaps for that. God bless that. Amazing. As longtime lovers of literature, they noticed several changes within the publishing industry and felt compelled to create a company that works towards social and economic justice through the words and works of others. They believe that the books they publish are stories that deserve to be heard. Wonderful. I love that. And just a little bit about Not Okay, and we're going to delve into this book today. I'm very excited to. It's a really fascinating book. Alone, scarred, ill-equipped, sometimes brash, Peter Wilson searches for healing from child sexual abuse and mental illness in the 1980s. With the resources at his disposal inadequate, he turns to the pop psychology self-help book, I'm Okay, You're Okay. Wisecracks and a little bit of murder? It sounds so interesting. I'm so excited to talk to you today, Brett. And without further ado, welcome.
Boy, this is exciting.
I'm so pleased to meet you, and I'd love to talk to you. I'm excited to talk about this book because I think something about it is that it's so gutsy, it's so visceral, and I really want to talk about sort of the overarching themes of this book and why those were the choices that made it into the book. We're talking about some pretty heavy topics, right?
Yes. Um, if um, a book like this already existed, I would have been content to just read it, but I was frustrated that there wasn't anything like this in the bookstore or the library, so I started writing it.
The overarching themes of this book. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Well, the description of it, I, it sounds less offensive than it is. It's kind of in your face. And I did one book event where a little old lady came to the event telling me that she'd bought the book to read it and she just wanted to let me know that she hated it. And it was important for her to come tell me that there's really no reason to be so graphic and have so much, you know, uh, spelled out. It can just be suggested. And I was like, well, I felt like it needed to be graphic because the material is it's real. It comes from a place of reality, and it's and reality life is really vulgar and disturbing at times. And I think that pretending it isn't doesn't do the world justice.
Thank you. Yes, I really agree with that, and that's something that I really love about what you wrote here, is that you weren't afraid to sort of delve into some of that. I want to say viscera again, just to to reiterate. I'd like to ask you about your character, about the main character, and how he came to form, and what was your process, and where did he come from?
Um, well, it's not really a fun beginning. This book didn't start out to be comical, which it ended up being, but the first version was nonfiction. I was writing about my own experience, having been abducted and abused and sex trafficked between the time I was 12 and 18. Um, and I took several years to write it, and I sent it around for people to read it. And I had people tell me this is just too dark and horrible and sad, and nobody is gonna suffer through reading it. I had one person tell me that just reading it could give you PTSD, which, I mean, I experienced it. So I put it aside and I went on to other things. And, as time went on, I became a published author. And I eventually came back to this book because it meant so much to me to try to, if I couldn't tell my story, to at least tell a story about what it is like to try to survive in the world, having experienced this. Because whenever you read a book about somebody who's been abused, the story is usually about the abuse itself, and then the victim isn't a person, they're an object, and the story is about the abuser. And I wanted to tell the story of the person who survives this becoming a self-actualized person, because that's the story that's not told. Um, and that's the story nobody wants to hear. It's like they want you to pretend you have not been injured and go through life as if, you know, these things didn't happen. Um, and I just felt the the trauma of trying to survive in the world that would rather you just be dead than deal with you is a story itself.
Wow, yeah, that's so real. Um, and I'm interested too, if you want to expand on this, about uh, how powerful it is to tell these stories that maybe the general public will shy away from even hearing because another person's trauma, not even their own trauma, but even being privy to another person's trauma is too much for them. And what do you think the power of stories like this is, and what the importance of it and the impact?
Well, I think just the world acknowledging that there are wounded people walking among you matters. And well, some of the stories in the book are directly taken from my life. Like when I was working on trying to heal, I saw a flyer about adult survivors of child sexual abuse, and that there was a support group to go to. And I was very excited about this because I really was trying to heal, and I was about 20 years old. And I went to this support group, and they were like, what are you doing here? It's like, I'm here because the flyer said, adult survivors of child, sexual abuse. That's me. It was like, men are not allowed in here. This is a safe space for abuse victims, not for you men. um, which, is kind of And it's important for women to have a safe space. But mention that on the flyer. Don't just assume that the only victims of child abuse, child sexual abuse, were women. Um, and little things like that. You I wanted to tell those stories, and I put those in there.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and I think you hit on something that's really has been a bit of a talking point a lot more lately. I think in a good way when it comes to what it really means to create a safe space that is also gender inclusive and actually is addressing the fact that abuse does not really have a gender, right? And that being a survivor of abuse doesn't really have a gender. Of course, there are the trends and the statistics that that we all have already understood, right? But that doesn't delegitimize the experience of someone else. And I'm curious about how, as we're talking about this character that you created, that's going through this experience, and that it does reflect pretty closely to your life. Um, what drove the decision to sort of not exactly skirt around it, but to sort of like do a bit of a left hook by bringing in a little bit of the a little bit of uncanny, a little bit of humor, a little bit of the absurd with the self-help book concept and all of that stuff.
I'm really glad you asked because this is so important. Comedy isn't a pretty thing, and the people who like are driven to be funny are using it as a survival mechanism in many cases. It is the most normal thing in the world to survive trauma by finding an addiction. And if the addiction is drugs or alcohol, it kills you. But if the addiction is being a wise ass, making a joke of everything, it's just as necessary to survival to keep that comedic persona up. And it is an addiction. And you know, I guess my book is showing the ugly underbelly of comedy because it's not that he is a funny guy, it's that he uses being funny to make it possible to survive in a world that's otherwise unsurvivable.
Absolutely, and that really comes through. And I think it's something that maybe is widely experienced by people who are experiencing troubles or trauma or difficult feelings, right? But using humor as a coping mechanism is something that I think many of us have experienced in life. I'd like to hear too about um, so the essential plot of the book is sort of the deconstruction of this sort of campy self-help book and how the character is going through this process, and then things start kind of wheeling out of control a little bit or wheeling into strange directions. So I'd like to hear about some of those strange directions that happen over the course of the book. You can decide for yourself if you want to spoil any plot points or not, but if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Um, well, I wanted to make an indictment of the entire psychiatric profession, um, but the book itself became a symbol of all the products that are used to sell to people who've been damaged to try to heal them, and how ineffective and inefficient they are, and how when you go to um, a psychiatrist or a psychologist with a real problem like this, you get treated with pop psychology. Um, don't get me wrong. I think the psychiatric profession is a good idea, but it's still bearskins and stone knives when it comes to dealing with an actually traumatized person. There is so little regard for a really wounded person. That I mean, my character, like me, went looking for help and found that help that was available was inadequate. Um, and I guess that book, not I'm okay, you're okay, epitomizes the failure of pop psychology as a whole. I didn't mention a book that I do recommend, actually, um, called Courage to Heal, which was co-written by Ellen Bass, who's also one of America's greatest poets. Um, and I did find that book very helpful in my 20s, in my mid 20s. But the I I think it was important for this book, because it is fiction, to really show what happens when you fail someone who needs help. Um, and you know, he kind of becomes a bit of a monster with the best intentions. Um, he really wants to be a serial killer, and he does have good motivations for it. But um, maybe we could help people before they're at that point.
So I think something that is touched on a bit, at least conceptually, by this book is the concept of restorative justice and restorative community care, right? And that's kind of what you're talking about how, or at least these are the connections that I'm making. And feel free to correct me or tell me if you see it a different way. But I think right now what we're experiencing is a sort of pop psychology, toxic positivity epidemic, which simultaneously pretends to address the mental health problems and the deep-rooted societal problems that cause these mental health problems, like pretends to address them while also truly dismissing them with uh, why don't you try yoga? Did you drink enough water today? Maybe you're sad because you didn't drink enough water today, that sort of thing. And I feel like we've entered an era in the past, say, 10 years of just like an epidemic of that sort of toxic positivity, while also, on the other hand, something that, and maybe you've noticed this as well in culture, it's starting to arise a bit more, is the concept of restorative justice and restorative community care, meaning that rather than centering the person who has done the harm, you center the person who has been harmed and restore them to good feeling or to good standing or to safety and care. And I wonder if you have thoughts about how that looks, or where this book touches on those ideas as well.
Well, I think that society at least is working toward um, getting justice from the perpetrators of the actual acts. Um, but really, um, it's not them I'm focused on in this book. It's you, and I don't mean you personally, but I mean it's the people who were neither injured nor injuring, but are just acquiescent uh, about about real trauma, and just would rather um, close out those people who are injured rather than find a way to include them. And that's, I don't want, you know, people who exclude to be punished. I want them to learn to include. You know, it's not that much different from putting a wheelchair ramp in front of your store. Um, some people's injuries don't require a wheelchair; they require a different kind of sensitivity or a different kind of accommodation.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that, because ultimately, a lot of the elements of what of like a fair and safe and good society looks like is it means that everyone has access to the joys and the goods of the world, right? Which also applies not just with the wheelchair ramp, as you said, but in interpersonal interactions where accessibility to like the social common and the social good is is made accessible to people who maybe have been uh, to use for lack of a better word have been debilitated or disabled by their experiences or disabled by the wrongs that have been done to them. So I think that's a really interesting way to put it, so thank you for saying that. I'd like to invite you as well, if you would like to, read a small excerpt from the book.
Oh,
You don't have to,
okay.
but if you'd
I
like to.
I will. I just, I didn't choose one, but I'm gonna. Do you have a favorite part?
I think I would like to hear it just from the beginning, maybe a couple of pages to wet the whistle of
Well,
our viewers today.
I I definitely don't want to read the first. Um, the way the book is set up is there's a segment in the first chapter, in the middle chapter, and the end chapter that take place in the present of the story, and the rest of it is taking place. He's telling the story. So I don't want to I don't want to start there. Oh my goodness, gosh, I sure wish I had planned for this. Um, that there are so many spots in this book that I absolutely love, and essentially there's such a dichotomy between the violent parts and the um, comedic aspects that I'm, you know.
Okay,
All right, I'm gonna just start reading from chapter 9. Okay.
wonderful.
Uh, well, you know what? Hold on a second. Let's come back up a little more because I've spent 25 years writing this book, so I'm really attached to it. And then when it did get accepted, it was 2 more years that the publishers put me through edits. Uh, so 27 years altogether.
My
Um,
goodness.
yeah, I mean, it's a joke, but it's also a sad joke. I spent more of my life making this book than I spent raising my children. Uh,
That it just means it's also your baby. It's a labor of love, right?
yes. Okay, I'm going to start from here. Uh, oh God, I'm so sorry. Starting in the middle of something is okay. Um, this is just after he's um, had a car accident and he's gone back into work after the injury. He's been missing for days without any explanation. Um, what the hell happened to you? The boss lady asked loudly when she saw me. Van hit me, I said. Didn't anyone tell you? I came to get you about 8 and found your cart empty and abandoned, she said. I remember I remembered then that I got picked up well after the cookie and ice cream cart and frozen lemonade cart did. I was at the hospital. Where's the money for all the sodas? She demanded. You should have $180 for me. It wasn't nearly that much, even though I hadn't counted it. I realized, of course, that the sodas that were left alone on the ground would have been stolen. She was going to charge me for every soda that had been left on the street. And what was worse, I had just gotten restocked a little before the accident, so that cart was practically full. Rather than fighting over that, I decided to say that there wasn't any money. I don't know why. It was just what I thought of right there. I was unconscious when they brought me into the hospital. They must have thrown the money away with my bloody pants that they cut off of me. I thought she was going to say something about the accident, maybe ask if I was all right, now that she knew it was serious. No fucking way. How are you going to pay me back? She asked. I don't know, I said, looking at my feet like a scolded child. I do. You're going to work it off, she said. Work it off, I said, surprised. I'd have to sell 1,000 sodas to cover all of that. It'll take a week. What am I supposed to live on in the meantime? Oh, you're not taking another one of my carts out, not after leaving one on the street. Those things are expensive. You're just lucky that cart wasn't stolen. You don't want to know how much you would have owed me then. What about me? I could have been killed, I yelled. That was scary. I had never yelled at my boss before. It was almost like yelling at Uncle Will. I went on to say that her insurance should cover the sodas and my medical bills too. Maybe if I wanted to put in a claim and make my premiums go up, fuck if I'm going to do that, she said, just like that. Then she said I have to clean the warehouse to work off my debt at $5 an hour. After that, we can talk about putting you back on a route, on probation, she said. I was getting mad now. Does that sound like a fair deal to you? It sounds like a big fuck job to me, I said, stiffening my body. Fair or not, it's the only deal you've got, she replied. Keep it, I said, turning and walked out the door. You're going to pay me back the money you owe me, she yelled after me. Sue me, I yelled back, and walked out of the place an unemployed man.
Righteous. Thank you. Um, that I think that excerpt definitely explored a few of the elements that we were kind of talking about earlier. Just the resistance to caring about the well-being of others, right? And checking in and caring more about one's own personal gain in that situation. Um, can you tell me a little bit about? And I do want to make make sure I leave some time for to talk about vinyl publishing as a whole too. But I'm just so fascinated by this story. I'd love to hear a bit more about as you're crafting some of the experiences and drawing from your own experiences, as well as crafting some characters for this character to interact with. I'm curious about how you construct, how do you balance the personal and the invented history of these characters, and the personal versus the invented personality traits and reactions and actions of the characters.
Well, for me, um, every character in this book is based on about three different people I know or have known in my life. I didn't want to make any one character based on a single person. I just sort of created a composite with elements of people that, you know, that made the characters real, but were also types of people that I'd encountered in my life. Uh, and of course, the main character, the speaker, started out as me in the first draft, but went way off from there. Um, the it's funny actually. I know you didn't specifically ask this question, but I finished a draft of this book in 2003, and at the time, I was friends with the daughter of the best-selling novelist in the country. And so I asked Naomi King, Stephen King's daughter, to read it for me and tell me what she thought. And she was like, my dad writes horror, but this is too horrible to read. It is just so painfully intense. The only way anyone will ever be willing to read this is if you make it funny too. So between 2003 and 2006, I added the element of his desperation to be funny, and it so informed him as a character that I had to start at the beginning again and rewrite everything around the fact that he's got a joke addiction. I think it made it more real because I mean I've known other survivors and they're all addicted to something. um, and making jokes has been how I survived.
Yeah, I can see how that construction really sort of rounded out the character and definitely for at least for me and I'm sure for many readers uh, fleshed him out in a way that was surprising but also completely relatable. Um, and as you said, like everyone who's experienced something like this or has suffered a trauma or is dealing with dealing with it has their own self-prescribed coping mechanism, and it can be anything from humor to liquor to sex to anything, right? I'd like to take a few moments to ask you about, and then we can move on a bit if you'd like to talk about the publishing company and where you all are going with that. But I'm interested in you've spoken a little bit about the reactions that you've had to the book, and I'm interested if you've had any reactions that have stood out to you, or if you foresee any interesting reactions coming out as more and more people start reading this book.
Well, I there's something I hear a lot that I wasn't expecting. I mean, now that I hear it, I go, yeah, okay. But it wasn't what I was thinking of at the time, and that's that people compare my book to a Clockwork Orange, and I didn't really see it that way. People are also comparing it to American Psycho, which I don't think that either of those characters had very much redeeming value. My guy, he might do some pretty bad things, but it's hard not to root for him. And those were pretty like nasty, horrible people. But now when they mention it, the fact that it is that graphic and that direct, it's not pussyfooting around. Personally, I'm a big fan of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I would have loved to have been compared to Hunter S. Thompson more than more than those authors, but still, I'll take it. It's better than you know being told it sucks.
I feel that, and that's an interesting reaction to hear, considering that the characters from A Clockwork Orange and from American Psycho are both uh, characters who are deeply narcissistic and violent because of their immense privilege, right? They're untouched by many of the ills of society, which has driven them to become these like terrible people. So if anything, I feel like those characters are the other side of the coin, or very opposite to the character in Not Okay. But
Yeah,
maybe, yeah, maybe
this.
aesthetically
I
there are
mean,
some
this guy
similarities.
didn't have any. He didn't have any privileges. He didn't. I mean, compared to them, uh, he had a really crappy time of it, and he's not a narcissist as they are. Um, but the thing that always bothered me about serial killer books, stories, is that they're always so good at it. Right from the very start, it's like, how did they get those skills? There was no college to go to for being a serial killer, but they're immediately great killers. And this guy has a real hard time learning how to drive a car and learning how to keep a job or go on a date. Um, how's he possibly gonna be good at being a serial killer? um, so I think I don't know of any book about a killer that has one who's incompetent, but
Right. And that's such an interesting twist as well. It really humanizes the act and makes you think about how sensationalized the concept of being a killer even is, to the point where it's all so fantastic that like fantastic in you know what I mean that
It
you've
was cathartic for me as a survivor
mhm.
to kill a bunch of serial killers, or to kill a bunch of pedophiles in my book. I mean, I would never have the guts to do that in real life, but it's a fun indulgence to, um, because one thing you can be sure is when they're dead, they're not going to do that again. And it's weird because I'm very much against the death penalty, because I think that it's not administered fairly, and far too often innocent people get you know get railroaded, and um, uh, I guess if I would make an exception, it would be for child rapists.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm kind of with you on that
but the problem
one.
there is, it doesn't matter what you're accused of if you didn't actually do it. And if you find out 25 years later that that person was innocent, it's kind of too late to give them their life back. So,
Yeah, it's the one thing one of the few things you can't really undo. This is true.
yeah.
So and on that note, by which I mean a completely different note, I'd love to talk about too how Not Okay came to be published by Vinal Publishing, and then subsequently, or which order did this happen in? Did you
Okay.
join?
Here, you're familiar with my children's book, Goblin Heart, aren't you?
Yeah,
You probably sold it in your store 10 years ago when it was new. Um, the owner of Vinyl Publishing is a woman named Jean Vinyl, and she's a wonderful human being. I really enjoy working for her. And she, at one point, wanted to start a movie making company. But after crunching the numbers, it looked like they really didn't have the millions and millions of dollars it would take to make major motion pictures. So the second best thing would be publishing books that ought to be major motion pictures. And I think that's at least what she started with in mind. And her daughter, Lizzie, had read my children's book, Goblin Heart, and liked it a lot, and told her about it. And she was like, I'd try to get this author. So I was contacted thinking that this is a publishing company that wanted one of my children's books. My children's books are a little radical, a little liberal, uh, not things that are going to be super socially accepted by the third of the country that vote for Trump. Yeah, uh, and so I submitted one, and she didn't think that was a great choice, and then I submitted another, and she didn't like that one as much either. And essentially, she went through the 9 children's books that I had finished and never found a publisher for, and she was like, "Well, do you have anything else?" It's like, actually, I have my novel. It's my life work. I'm so uh, attached to it that I'm almost afraid to let another publisher see it and reject it. It was This book was rejected by the same publisher twice. Uh, yeah, St. Mark's. I'm St. Martin's Press. Uh, I sent them the first 3 chapters. They said, "We love this. We'd like to see the rest of it." I sent them the rest of it, and then they rejected it. And then about 6 months later, I get a call saying, "We'd like you to, I read these first 3 chapters. I love them. I'd love you to send the rest of the manuscript." And I was like, you already did that and rejected it. It says, "Well, there's 12 different editors here. Each one makes their own decisions. Those first 3 chapters have been floating around the office all this time. Everybody loves them. Send the." So I sent the book, and they rejected it again. So at least I had a name and a phone number the second time, and it was like, if you love this book so much, why are you rejecting it? And they're like, because it's just too real. It's too graphic. It's too violent. It's too perverse. And people love graphic and violent and perverse if it's meant to titillate, if it's entertaining. But the graphic violence and is unpleasant as real graphic violence is, and the attempts at sex that this sexually damaged person has are very damaged attempts. They're not titillating. They're not erotic. They're horrible because that was the reality. And they're like, make it less real and more, fun, and we'll think about it. It's like, no, I'd rather it never be published than, just make it another, you know, uh, uh, episode of Criminal Minds. Um, so it didn't, and she, Jean read it, and she says, "This is the one I want to publish." And I was like, "You realize there's some people that are going to hate you for this?" Just like, "That's okay." Um, and it was gutsy, and I honestly think one of my children's books would have probably sold better. Uh, it's done okay, and it's been, you know, popular among a cult, but it's not in the top 100. Anyway, um, in order to make the deal, I went back and forth from Albany, where I live, to Buffalo, and I met with Jean and her husband Greg, and we had some conversations about writing and editing, and my background was in editing. And in the course of these conversations, they were like, "We'd kind of like you to be our main editor and pick the books that we publish." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I picked this one of mine over here." It's like, no, 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 other people's. And that was fun because the very first thing I did when I got that job, day one, is I contacted my favorite under recognized authors. And one of them we signed right away, Sparrow, who you have in your store live on September 10th, I think. Um, and I mean, I adore his work, and and he's not like anybody else who's writing. He's kind of like this one of a kind. So to have been like the editor that brought one of his books to light was a real thrill for me. Uh, and now there's four books. There's two children's books. There's four more that hopefully will be coming out in 2022 if COVID will allow it. And there's a few more after that. I love being the editor. I don't love having other people look at what I decided after I decided. That's part of the job. I I get to say yes, but still the bosses have to say yes after me. And one thing that's different about vinyl, which I love, is that we're not just looking for polished, perfect, great manuscripts. We've, if they're pretty good, we'll work on them until they're great. Going back and forth with an author to fine tune and negotiate and discuss minutia that mainstream publishers don't give a damn. They're like, oh, whatever, it's going to sell. We don't care. But every line matters, and my bosses understand that it's worth spending a lot more time on each book to make sure that uh, it's not just saleable; it's as good as it can possibly be, and I love that. Uh, I don't know if you know the industry is going to care, but there, you know, it's a company that really puts its all into every book, and I love that.
I love that too. That's it's really encouraging to see, you know, a publishing house or a publishing company that's actually looking to connect to some real authors and go through the process with them instead of just flipping out whatever's the sellable, uh, cookie cutter du jour, right? Taking some risks.
There used to be a lot of publishers like that, passionate, dedicated people who just loved what they were doing. You know, I think about Black Sparrow Press. I think about Grove Press in the 30s and 40s. You know, bringing Samuel Beckett and Arthur Miller and F. Scott Fitzgerald to the market. These are people that were passionate about making a wonderful book, not just knocking off something that's going to sell. And there's that's not really a lot of that out there anymore. You got these big machine companies that just want to regurgitate the same problem over and over again. Oh, you know, this works. Give us another story about, you know, a teenage hero that fights, you know, the blah blah blah. You know, it's the same. It's Harry Potter again. It's Hunger Games again. It's Da Vinci Code again. Make something new, you know, and the creative geniuses that are making something new, the only outlets available to them are self-publishing, and it's such a scourge because potentially great books don't get worked on until they're truly are great. You can't take the elevator. You have to walk on each step. Um, and one of the conditions that I made to my taking the job was that no author would ever be asked for a penny, ever. This is not a self-publishing scam. The word hybrid comes up a lot, and I hate that because it's companies that make their money from aspiring authors instead of making their money from book sales, and that's not what you know. You know, I hate reading a self-published book and thinking, if you spent 3 more years on it and had 2 more editors working on this, this could have been great. This could have been a Pulitzer Prize winner, and it's such a waste that it wasn't. So
Yeah, it's very refreshing to hear you say that too. And I hope that, we get to see so much more of vinyl publishing as the years truck on. I think you're going to draw a lot of really interesting new authors in and make quite a quite a quite a splash. I'm ready for it.
I
Absolutely.
hope so. I very much look forward to getting to DC and meeting you and your store in person. You know, the last time I was in DC, I was reading poetry at a an activist event. I think I may have mentioned that, and definitely being a novelist is different from being a performing poet. It's a whole different crowd, um, and you know, I mean, it's really nice to have the community. I think my favorite part of being a writer is going to a place and connecting with other writers, other people that are passionate too. And I love the fact that now when I do that, I'm like, hey, other writers, I'm an editor, and I may be not able to accept your book right now, but I will keep plugging away. I'll keep telling you what I like and not like, And if you keep working on it and working on it, eventually something, don't get me wrong. I mean, not everybody is going to like what I like, but um, I know what vinyl will publish, and I am not um, quick to tell somebody they're not good enough. I like to say that you might still be on the vine, you might still need to grow, but you know don't give up. So
It's very encouraging words, especially for someone like me who is an aspiring author. So, keep an eye out for those of us who are going to be following in your wake. We have about a minute and a half or so left. I'd love to give you this opportunity to let our viewers know how they can follow along with you and keep up with your work and keep up with Vinyl Publishing.
well, if you friend Vinyl Publishing on Facebook, I'm actually directly connected to that. You can also follow Vinyl on Instagram and Twitter, but I don't do those myself. And I'm kind of partial to what I'm involved in personally. And essentially, if you email editor at vinylpublishing.com, I will be the person who reads it, and I will be honest and direct with everyone. I don't ignore people. I mean, I might if this ever becomes so big that I don't have enough time. But for now, it's 2 or 3 people a day, and I can well handle it.
Great. Well, I look forward to seeing more of what Vinyl starts putting out. I'm excited for more people to be able to read your book, to read Not Okay. Uh, for those of you watching right now, if you don't have your copy yet, you can come right on over to our store on 18th Street and grab your copy and read this amazing book. I really encourage you to do so. It's worth your while. Buckle up, but read it, and other than that, we will also be having another author from Vinyl Publishing join us in early to mid September on September 10th in person at the store. So you can meet Sparrow and learn about the Princeton Diary. There it is, and enjoy yet another author from this super cool publishing company. And we definitely invite you all to join us. Thank you so much, Brett, for being here tonight. I hope that you have a wonderful evening.
Oh, I suppose I should hold up my book too.
Yes,
There you
let's
go.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, come see Sparrow because he's amazing. If you read The New Yorker, you're familiar with some of his writing. He's in there. He's also in The Sun rather frequently, and he's got a different outlook on the world that you know you might not agree with everything he says, but he'll make you think.
Well, that's intriguing enough for me, for sure. And thanks again, Brett. I hope that you have a great evening, and I hope that we see you soon sometime in DC.
Thank you. I will. I'm hoping if COVID lets